All right. Yeah, and as you notice, I'm also working with trying to get some other backgrounds for me, because sometimes I can't work from this computer because it gets really hot in here, or this one isn't working well. But other parts of my house are either kind of a mess, or people are walking around behind me like workmen who are going to eventually come back and do my floor. So today I decided I would be in space using an image from the Star Trek Lower Decks. Yeah, so I didn't make it myself. I got it from online, of course. Okay, so page 98. Page 98 is the last page of chapter 3. But in the last page of chapter 3, you've got some really important big ideas there. So start right there. Be sure that's one of those areas. And then most of what we're talking about for the formative period today is going to come between about 99 through 116. And again, you're not trying to memorize every single comment. You're getting an overview of how life changes, and there are some kind of breakout conversations again about how ritual life is progressing, how they're building their structures, and so forth. So this particular area, why settle down, is what I would call this topic, because we are looking at the beginnings of village, town, and then eventually urban life in Mesoamerica. So the big idea of this is, what are the social challenges of trying to maintain a healthy and well-managed, stable community, even if it's not very large. We're also today going to introduce you to a culture known as Mokaya. It's in this section of reading. Probably haven't heard of this before. It's not in an area that really gets much in the way of tourists, but it's an important zone that has lots of archaeology, and it's the zone that I did most of my field work. So we've been seeing images from the Mokaya region. So part of the college courses, you just meet stuff, you get to learn things that not everybody knows who just looked up a few things on the internet. So this will be in the far southern. So before we wrap this up, we will have looked at the Central Highlands just a little bit, Platilco, Chupicro, the Gulf Coast, the Olmec area, ancient West Mexico, which is actually central coast there, right? Jalisco, Nayarit, and Colima. And then we'll be way down to the south where the state of Chiapas meets Guatemala down there. So we'll look at these 4 regions, and you have a good look at what's going on in the formative period. So let's do that. So on page 98, the main thing that you want to do, and if you have your textbook handy, this is not a bad time to actually do some either a little bit of highlighting or a couple of little arrows that go in. Usually I just do that. If I'm going to work with the book, I have a couple of colored pencils and I just do a little arrow or something. So what are the main things they're saying change when society settled down? So I'm not assuming that any of you have taken any kind of a anthrotype course before. So we want to, but it is anthropology. So we're really looking at people. We're not just looking at their buildings. We're trying to use what they left behind to get a good idea of what was going on with them, with their families and themselves and ancestors, descendants, and so forth. So it starts right at the top and says, so why settle down? Why would a group that had been doing well for, at this point, 20,000 years in the whole region, by moving around seasonally, not building buildings that have to stay standing for a long period of time, not bothering with roads, not bothering with walls, not digging wells, why would they begin to make this transition to settling into one particular zone? The advantages must be there, right? They must be finding something that's making that attractive, because whenever we try something new that we've never done before, it makes you nervous. And that nervousness, right, about being able to survive is partly why we see that growth in those small handmade figures that are clearly related to concepts of fertility and probably other things that we haven't discovered yet for that. So the advantages are one thing we want to look at, but we also want to look at what the disadvantages or costs. Use that cost. What is the cost of settling down? What do you give up? What becomes more risky? What things are going to make you nervous or have great years or rougher years? And so they list a few right off the bat for that. So what are some of those advantages and disadvantages? It turns out that for the most part, it's mainly disadvantages. Now, when people decide to adopt a lifestyle that's mainly, right, and I'm not just saying that's not what they care about the most, but if you were making a list, a checklist, like plus and minus on your checklist, you're going to have way more minus considerations than you have plus, but you'll still do it even if there's only a couple pluses, if the plus is the main thing you're worried about. It's kind of like living in a big city like this. The minuses are huge, right? Bad traffic, unclean air, lots of crime, living with people that you don't know, so you're not real comfortable with them because you don't know most of your neighbors, crowding, competition for resources, which means that the resources we need are very, very expensive. Those are a lot of minuses, but we still do it, right? And the same thing's going on in the ancient world. So we need to discover what the advantages they were looking for were. So on disadvantages, so just be sure that you look at that page in some detail. Includes issues with health. Whenever we settle as human beings into one spot, then our garbage starts to build up and our sewage starts to build up, right? Our urine, poop, food garbage, things that we've thrown away, and that sort of thing. So plus other issues of carbon, but just the basic of sanitation becomes something you have to worry about, because where you have right, urine, where you have feces, poop, whatever you want to call it, where you have food garbage, that attracts insects and other animals. And when it attracts insects like flies and mosquitoes and other kinds of organisms, then now you've got things like parasitic infections, infections from bug bites, you know, things that upset your digestive system and so on and so forth. Plus, when we settle down, we give each other diseases much more easily. Populations that move around and don't settle and stay put and breathe inside the same building all the time and so forth, on the planet and for human history, have far less dramatic problems with the kinds of diseases that we give to each other because they're not coming in contact with so many people. This is why for lots of professionals, including especially all our anthropology, archaeology, prehistory kind of scholars around the whole world, the situation going on, for instance, in the US right now, and I'm not familiar whether this is happening in other countries or not, of people saying, oh, well, it's not real, and even if it is real, I'm not going to wear a mask. But I guess I'm not going to wear a mask because you told me to wear a mask, and they don't do anything anyway. We live in the most unhealthy type of environment ever invented by humans, and breathing on each other, touching things that each other have handles, and so on and so forth, is exactly why this is a big deal for us and not so much of a problem in all of the history of our species. So yeah, everything has costs, in other words. All right, I'm just looking and making sure that stuff's running okay over on the side. So health issues, they're very specific about what some of them are. But yeah, we just think we live in a healthy place. But when I'm thinking, oh, the one side you don't get a disease, and the only thing I have to do is wash my hands a bunch of times per day, not touch people I don't know, and wear a mask. How simple is that? So I personally, logically, as a human, don't get the conversation coming from people who refuse to do any of those things. But it is what it is. And ancient populations knew this. Workload. Now, when we settled down, we've got a much, much more work. And this is something that you can also see for us today. People living in cities, in urban environments, you and me, we work more hours per day, many more hours per day and per week and per month than mobile foragers or hunting and collecting populations, far more hours per week. Those other populations, part of the reason that some cultures in the world do not want to transition into living into one settled lifestyle, not living out in nature and so forth, is that they have free time every day. And they don't have to feel, right? They do what they're doing because they're just going to repair a few things. They're going to secure whatever it is they're eating that day, and then the next day they work on it again, unlike our particular type of trauma. So the workload goes up. The amount of time it takes to make their storage, their housing, their equipment, and how many hours per day that takes. And once you start farming, then your workload goes up way, way, way more. There's tons of things you have to do frequently. Maintaining territory. Now, maintaining territory is another job. It's partly why the workload goes up, and you need to do it if that territory is keeping your group alive. But when you maintain territory, that means you have to keep an eye and see if anyone is coming in or crossing over your area and know whether you're going to get along with them or not. So that increases the dangerous part, because if the other group is larger or more aggressive or desperate to find a place that they can settle that has what they're looking for, whether that's farming area, hunting area, clean water, whatever it is, then you could end up with violence, right? You could end up fighting with each other. If everybody's mobile, that doesn't happen very often at all, because they're not settling for more than a short period of time in one particular zone. And then social order. Now, as you all know from your lives, and some of you have things that go way smooth with the people you know, and others of us, it's a little bit more rocky. With groups of people who are settled down in order to do the same thing, and even if your group is only maybe 20 to 100 people, each time you try to make a decision, and it's not just a couple people, the amount of time it takes to make a decision can be longer. And the bigger the group, the more different viewpoints there might be, and the more that they may group up with each other, because everybody that disagrees is related to each other versus other families that they're not getting along with in your community. And the next thing you know, you're starting to have lots of things that you need to manage all the time in regards to who's making decisions, how you make decisions, and when there's arguing, conflict, disagreements, or really rough stuff going on, then how are you going to manage that conflict? So all of that becomes much more work. It doesn't happen overnight. They didn't all decide to settle down at the same time, but little by little over the centuries, we see the entire region head towards overwhelmingly settled life in agricultural towns, smaller towns that are doing manufacturing or other kinds of work, and then, like we have, eventually, in the next unit, urban zones where hundreds of thousands of people live in places where they have to have a different kind of work. They're not raising their own food anymore. They're doing other things for work. So very, very big change in life. It's one of the areas of the world where we can really study this transition, because this is the transition that leads to our lifestyle today. Right? And it happened in Africa, and it happened in Asia, and it happened in what we call Europe, and a number of lots and lots of other places around the Mediterranean, for instance, over time. So just go through, it's one page that lays all of this. So it's really easy to go through, and it'll be real simple for you to make a nice, note card with some bullets on it that outline some of these things that they're saying. Okay. Now, one of those why settle down and costs of settling down, what do you have to do in order to settle down and be comfortable, has to do with creating social cohesion. So social cohesion. In that particular part, it gets over, and in that first section of reading, you'll see something between like page 103, 104, right there, where they're talking about the role of your ritual, I'm not going to say employees, right? Ritual practitioners, that would be a good one. So how do we know that that's important? And how can we find, even though we can't talk to these people, evidence of the who was actually kind of initially important? So people that are running rituals, so here's something that's kind of more directly anthropology oriented, but certainly is a general type of concept for us all. So when you're looking at something called ritual, it doesn't have to be religious. And spelling it would be good. And this one, I don't have my reading glasses on, so I'm typing stuff that I can't see. If I can't see what I'm writing, what I'm typing, then for some reason I type it incorrectly. Oh, perfect. Okay, so ritual does not have to be a religious activity. We do most of our rituals, and ritual means a repeated group behavior. It can be a repeated individual behavior. So ritualized just means you're going to repeat it. Going to go through the same format. Timing is usually very important, and you know what the purpose is. Why are you doing this? So with the ones that have to do with well-being for a society, we have lots of group things where we group up, somebody leads or takes the main role, and you celebrate cohesion, getting along, your family. So a common type of, I'm going to just put cohesion, ritual is feasting. Oops, and I spelled that wrong. Right, like Sunday dinner. If you belong to a family where you get together every single weekend and everybody's supposed to be there, and they make you highly motivated to be there because there's going to be lots of food. It's frequently very similar food from week to week to week. You're going to be seeing everybody there, and usually you don't have to always meet at the same house, but it'll be mainly the same group. Yep, that's a cohesion ritual. That even if you aren't all getting along, man, I've done those for years with my in-law family, and for at least 10 years, the two oldest sons of the grandparent of the main group weren't speaking to each other, mainly because they hated each other's wives. The wives were married in, the brothers were brothers. They were close in age. So the oldest brother and his wife did not get along with the second brother and his wife. But they showed up every single week. They didn't necessarily sit next to each other. Their kids know each other. The kids know that they're cousins, and they chat. They are paying respect to the parents, and then the rest of us were there that were not part of whatever the hell was going on between those two. And it wasn't anything significant. It was just personality clash. Then I would sit for an hour or so by one of the groups, and then go in the patio and sit down by the other two. One of the groups would usually eat in the kitchen, the other one outside, but they were all still there. That is a ritual. They did not show up because they were dying to see each other. They showed up because the group does that to maintain, right, their identity, whatever that might be. So you do lots of those. That's, 4th of July, that's the parties at the end of the season for Little League and Children's League of Things. It's the celebrations that you do for parent organizations when your kids are all going to the same school. These are rituals. These are social rituals. So now who is leading these, right? Who is helping them to celebrate that no matter if you're not getting along with all of your neighbors and other sorts of people, you're still part of the same community and you have more in common, right? You have your community family than you might with other strangers. So on your textbook, it's going to show something like this, or exactly like this picture on page 103 or 105. You'll find it right there. And the figure is 44 or 4345 on there. Now, what is this? This is a mirror. this is so interesting. We saw last Monday, a week ago, one of the Tlatilco figures of the female. She didn't really have anything else on other than some paint over the figure. And glued to her chest was a little piece of polished obsidian, a little tiny flake of polished obsidian. Obsidian, you all, is volcanic glass. It's made by nature. It's something that you get when you live near volcanoes. In Mesoamerica, not every region is super close to volcanoes, but they all have access to volcanic glass. There's a lot of volcanoes in that area. So in this case, this little mirror wasn't just to really look at yourself for them. We can see this one had little pierced holes on it, and they would just polish this up. It emphasized the shaman's equipment and purpose within their worldview system, that humans were one part of the group and that there were bigger things to consider in the world. So those ritual leaders initially, along with probably elders in the community, just the oldest people, just because they lived a long time and they were problem solvers, are probably their original practitioners for social cohesion. And it's probably like that most places in the world as well. So in this particular case, this is a really typical kind of style of formative figurine. In this case, again, made by hand, not very large, it shows this huge flattened disc worn on the forehead, kind of like those big shiny lights that you might see people going in caves, or they put on their forehead sometimes when you're doing certain types of really delicate surgeries and things like that. In this case, though, we do know that these were, and this is a piece of figurine from the southern area that we're going to look at here from the Mokaya culture, that these were probably the people that took the lead in these activities. So it says in your textbook, just in case, I know a few of you probably don't have that handy, or maybe maybe something else is going on with reading. So it just says, during the formative period is the first appearance of the Mesoamerican mirror. And it just says it's a polished fine grained stone. And almost always it's going to be obsidian. So for us, mirrors, we use them for hygiene or to look at ourselves personally, or cater to our desire to look in a particular way. In the ancient world, these, if you're wearing this on your forehead and you're outside, they're going to be like a sparkling light. It's going to look like you have a flashlight on your forehead. But we know also that these can be worn and the person can learn how to stand in one specific location, look at something, and set it on fire. So these would allow you to look like you had laser vision. You could either make people squint or see that your head was lit up, right? It's magical. It's part of saying that there's more going on, that this is more special. So stop complaining. Oh, and just in case you're worrying, are those two brothers getting along now? Yes, one of them, eventually his marriage to that particular wife, and she wasn't super problematic in any particular way. These aren't evil people, they're just a different personality. So when that finished up, and he's the only person in the family that's ever gotten divorced in a couple of generations for this group that's here locally. When that finished up, then he and his other brothers sort of started getting along better with each other. So yeah, so this is a mirror. Sometimes we see them on the chest as well, but not unfrequently, beginning in the formative, we see certain images of them wearing them on the head. Okay, so that's in your reading. Just want to make sure you slow down when you get there. Okay, so you've got a little bit of reading there that has some vocabulary that maybe you're not in love with, but we do need to use a little bit the term egalitarian versus hierarchical. You don't live in an egalitarian world, you live in a hierarchical world, so social ranked. So they just want to make sure that you take a look at this. In an egalitarian community, people more or less all have equal say in what's going on. So all the adults, for instance, are going to join together and discuss and say what's going to happen. Or all of the adult females, depending on what the subject is, they're going to get together and they're going to decide and discuss what's going on. Over time, when your population starts to get bigger and bigger, it starts to be that it doesn't work this way anymore. And of course, that's not how we're living either. So we get a hierarchy where certain people are considered to be higher ranking. So going from before the beginnings of and at the very beginning of the formative period, where you have really informal leadership. You all know that one person is the biggest expert of knowing where to find water in a year where it hasn't rained a long time. Or there's somebody there that has a great personality, and when people argue, they're really good at talking you down from maybe hitting each other or leaving the group or something like that. Over time, that doesn't seem to be the thing that gives them the best results, and little by little they start to have ranking where certain people are more listened to than others all the time. And probably initially it's older people because they just have more experience, right? So that means if you have a ranked or hierarchy of social structures within your society, that you have two tiers, the leaders and everybody else. And this is early on, just leaders and everybody else. In college terminology, we call those kinds of societies chiefdoms. So if they have a few leaders, or outrank the rest, and everyone else is in the second group, then we call that a chiefdom. So whoever it is at the most outspoken, that people are more likely to listen to, that's your chief. So what did it say for you right there in the very beginnings from the first unit when they were talking about starting in the formative period, in every excavated zone of Mesoamerica, we can find two structures that are always present once they start to settle down. Once we can see that they've got a few unrelated families living together in a little small community setting, I'll even tell you the page, it's going to be the right the page. There's a cool picture there. And where am I? I think I can find something super fast. I prove myself wrong, but that's because I get a bunch of extra pieces of paper in my textbook here. Where are you? Right on page like 33, where it says Mesoamerica, Villages and Urbanites of the Formative. There's a picture there, 1.8, and it says that by 1500 BCE, so well before we're looking at this point, every type of settled community we can find has two important building types. A chief's house, an elite, they just say elite residence. It doesn't mean it's like a palace, it just means it's bigger than everybody else's. And the second one, a ball court. They have a place where that central voice probably carries on meetings and stores things for the community and so forth. And then they have an area in the community where they're doing this activity that's not only for a ritual, but it's also a game where they all come, watch, some participate in, and celebrate, right? So yeah, chief's house and that. We can tell from burials that not everyone buried in the communities has the same social status. So again, partly what you're looking at in that first page in page 98, that they're going to have leaders that address these kinds of problems. In Canvas, there is a short read on a archaeological site. In Guatemala. It is called Tacalicaba. And it's just talking about one burial that was discovered there. So that'll just be in there. You just get this idea of how we can tell between the layout of the site and the burials that we've got some people that are leaders already. All right, we'll go back. Okay. for this one. Okay. Now, where are we looking at it on the map? I didn't give you any places that you needed to label real specifically for this, I don't think, in this, or not too many, but I will show you some of where we are. Now, what you're doing for your map activity, and nobody turned it in yet, so I know you're gonna do it today or tomorrow, right? By Wednesday, or you might do it on Wednesday if you have time on Wednesday. Most of the places on the one map are right over here in this zone, around where it says Kiriwa. Up here. This is, right, the Gulf Coast region here, going into that particular zone. So the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Right now, though, the borderline between the modern nation of Mexico and the modern nation of Guatemala is up here. It's right along in this particular zone that's a little bit further north. So this one that says Caminalhuyu, this is where Guatemala City, the capital of Guatemala, is. So we're looking at right along in here. The site of Ujuste, we've seen pictures of it, you just didn't know because that's where I did my field work. The little article that's posted in Canvas is here for Takalikaba. This is actually in kind of a very interesting area to visit a little bit if you go way out of the way, because tourists don't usually go down in this zone at all. I've never really met any that were down there, but once I did a tour with some other friends, not to do work, and visited, there's a lot of interesting archaeological sites down here. But this is a coffee growing region, and so there's some archaeological sites that are there. But what we can see during the period of development here is these go from a short period of time where it's a really small community to, with leadership, these super organized, look at this, the big grid plan here, really huge structures, multiple areas on the site that are ball courts, and we can see right here, there was a ball court right here in the center of this. Tons of larger structures here, and this doesn't even map all the little spots for regular style housing and other activities going on. So we're starting to really cluster, doing a lot of work, and this just takes place pretty quickly for what we're looking at. The site of Ujuste is during or through that cultural zone called Mokaya, and this would have been really large, probably about 1,000 people living here a few centuries before the turnover to what we call the AD area here. What you can see, we're on this such a beautiful zone, but you know, beauty, right? Eye of the beholder. So these are all, this whole region of Guatemala is working ranches for commercial production. They're growing corn, sesame, and a few other types of crops. Bananas are a really big one down here, and almost all of it is exported out of Guatemala. This does not go to feed the local population. They're not growing fruits and vegetables for locals. Locals kind of do some of their own of that. Over in the background, you can see this ridge line here. These are volcanoes. And you can see the peaks of several of them in this ridge. Super, and these vent or smoke every single day, every day that I was down here. So this is me just taking a picture from one of my excavations across, and you can see, even though there's a lump right here, one here, a bigger one here, a big one here, some more here, and you can see them in the, and I'm standing on a higher area. These are all the foundations for ancient structures that are about 2,500 years old. Even though they've been rained on for 2,000 years, even though the tractors and other equipment is driving over the top of them, dragging, digging into them, and people are walking along the top and looking to see if they can find any cool things. It doesn't have a lot of looting here because hardly anyone lives here who isn't a ranch worker for these, but the buildings are still fairly large. So this was already in the formative period. Some of these zones are really getting developed fairly fast. So the issues that start to arise in a community like this is the same stuff that would arise anywhere. People disagreeing, people interfering with each other's relationships, people who don't do their workload, people who don't contribute to the way that they're supposed to. So in this one, we see a big ritual platform, but all the rest of these are the supports for houses. And so we're just thinking about in this, and there's no only one answer to this, but think about what social structures help larger groups maintain security and the feeling of well-being. Security is going to be more like social leadership, right? And well-being, that is the shamanic group, right? Where they're looking for answers. Why? Why did that happen to you? Why isn't it raining? What do you need to do to make it go better? How can you get along better with other individuals? Or who should you be afraid of? They also can answer that question for you too sometimes. Is somebody causing you problems? Okay, so let's look at just a few more. Okay, just a couple more things to look at for these, and then we'll be kind of done with this. So we can look at the bigger, lot more details. We won't be able to look at everything, but the bigger, more dominant, culturally dominant group during this particular period, which we call Olmec. So now we do have archaeological excavations from the zone that let us see just what their houses looked like, how big they were, and what they were made out of. So we can be really accurate and give you a good idea of how most people lived, which kind of gives me like little goosebumps here. What we see over and over and over again in this southern region especially, highlands a little bit different, but any place where it's pretty rainy, is that they do build up the platform of the house, that you do step up and go up with a little bit of a porch in the front, and that your floor isn't exactly on the dirt. And that's because it gets really rainy and really muddy, right? So you would want to not have it flooding through. Typically inside is just a single room. Typically when we have really good preservation, we do not see that they bothered with windows. The door is the door. It may have had a drapery or something over in the front of it, but this is not an area of the world where it's really cold. So they're not really worried about cold. They're more thinking about not getting heavily rained on, or not getting wet for things, or getting shade. Just being able to do some of this. Work was mainly taking place outside of the house. And most houses have a little structure fairly close by, which is probably where they were doing the heating up for food or other activities that required burning something or heating something up. Doesn't look like they were doing it in the main house. When I've been living in some or around and traveling through some, really income isn't really even a concept for some of those. They really are day to day, but really low income, very isolated rural areas in this zone. Almost everybody still does not cook in the house they sleep in. The house that they store their materials in, that they might go into sleep, where they're storing other things that they might need, like bags of beans or seeds for later on and so forth, the kitchen is somewhere else. Why? Because you're setting things on fire and your roof is made out of dry grass or dry palm leaves. So in case you have an accident and a charcoal gets up this way and it sets it on fire, all you're setting on fire is just the cooking room. You're not burning down everything else. And yeah, even when I asked about it, thinking that was probably what was going on, they looked at me like I was the most ridiculously stupid person on the planet and went, well, yeah, of course you don't set things on fire in your house. So the other thing that was interesting about it as well, this is from a site called Seren. It's actually in El Salvador, but it really looks very, very similar to all the rest that we've looked at. We're going to look and see what a definition of wattle and daub is for you today as well. So wattle and daub. You can still see wattle and daub structures all over southern Mesoamerica. The Highland Maya area, other rural zones, really, really common. If it's super wet 12 months per year, they don't usually do the clay on the surface, but here's how we use that. So it's a building, it's how you make these buildings. And so wattle and daub is how they make the walls, not the ceiling, right? Not the roof, but how you just make your walls. So the wattle part, like this picture here to the left, the wattle is where they take some thin canes or thin stick, like pieces of wood from shrubs or young thinner trees, and they weave them together. They put the posts straight down in the ground, really close to each other, and then they just take the green bendable wood and they put it in there like they're making a basket. The house, the inside of the basket, the framework of the house is like making a big vertical basket. They put that together first, stick it down into the ground and sort of settle it in there. And then, so that's the wattle part. The weaves, like W for weaving. The wattle part is the weaving the wall interior part together. Super simple. Do you need strong people to do this? No. Do you need 30 people to help you do this? No. Parents with their little kids can do this. This is something everybody knows how to do when they used to do it or if they're still doing it. So wattle and daub. So the daub then is the sticky, wet soil, clay and sand. They also, in some areas of the world, they do this using animal dung, which means animal shit, or straw. So you're taking clay type earth or sticky earth, getting it damp so that it's kind of wet and greasy, and then you're just putting it on this part, the cane part, and it's going to stick, right? It's going to go into those little grooves and those areas, and then they kind of polish it or make it flat on the outside. It can be painted, and it will hold the paint just fine. So that's the daub, is the clay part here on the side. You can see that the roof, this is actually a pretty big sized structure here. There isn't any interior walls to it. So there's bigger pieces of wood on the inside that kind of just come together. And there's almost always one single pole, like a tent going up in the top that holds the center of the roof up. Sometimes they need a couple of those vertical poles, but sometimes all they need is one. This is how they did it 3,000 years ago. This is how lots of people still build their structures today. And if they aren't mainly living in this and they're using this for storage or a type of garage or a little work area, still know how to do it. It's one of those practical skills that people still remember how to do. It's very, very cool, right? Really awesome. What's the best about this? You don't need money. That's why they're still making it. Nothing costs money. You get it from natural materials on the landscape. You don't need a lot of extra help. When you get to the roof part, yeah, you need a few adults and you need to be able to put together something that's like a ladder, and you don't want to fall down, so you don't want your younger kids to help you on this, but the whole family can help, and it only takes a few sets of in-laws, and it doesn't take a super long time, right? And this type of roof, right, this type of this is called thatch, this type of roof. Well, it's called thatch in English. This type of roof we still see even in modern day expensive resorts when they're trying to make really easy to put together, easy to fix, easy to update shade in beach and pool type settings where people are spending hundreds of dollars a night to hang out in hot areas where they don't want to get a sunburn for all that. So this is wattle and daub. The shape of the buildings change. Maya speakers usually, in some of the most traditional areas, the side wall is roundish on the sides. And so it's like an oval. It's not round all the way around, but it has these sort of rounded out side walls. In other areas, they make all four walls flat. What happens when this starts to wear out? You tear it down, you pull this off, you set it on fire to get rid of it, and you build it again. And in a couple days, your whole house is rebuilt. If this starts to get wet and it comes across, then you just replaster it. Does it cost any money? No. I wish we had things that we could do for our houses that didn't cost money, right? So even if we do look at this a little bit, and here's the last thing for these, what we see in these, so here's the porch. If we were just looking at above, we saw stored extra clay blocks for the construction of it, just a single floor in there, no separate rooms, so that's not really privacy or things like that. We see that there was sort of a table in the back particular structure that's not too far away. And we see another structure here that has a different function, and the field part where they were growing their crops is just a few steps away from the house. So they're really living right in their fields right there so that they can watch them for animals coming in and stealing their food, insects, people sneaking up on them, and things like that. All right, so just in terms of things that you're looking for. So rise of chiefdom starts around about 108. You look for Maukaya culture. There's not a lot. There's just a few paragraphs. None of this is 10s or 20s of pages of reading. Just take a look. And our example for the course for Maukaya culture is Uhushte. It's typically called El Uhushte. Uhushte actually is just the name of the ranch there, and it's named after local plants that are there. It doesn't mean anything fancy. (24) and 25 in your textbook is those pages where it starts talking, where it lays out, right? They have the green and gray columns there. So you're just looking at the difference between egalitarian, where everybody has the same status, to ranked. Just looking at a ranked society a little bit. And again, not asking you to memorize everything, just get an idea, a feel of what's different about life. This coast area geographically is called the Soconusco. Some of you have heard of that too. There's a lot of agricultural work that goes on down there. 3 main crops today, well, maybe 4. Maize or corn, bananas, sesame seeds, like the little sesame seeds, and coffee. The kind of bananas they grow down there, you all, or for export. So it's not plantains. It's not the ones that you're going to use and cook or fry or do other things with them. It's just these snack bananas that people like in urban North America and in Europe. And in fact, actually the ranch that was right next door to ours was only growing bananas, and all of their bananas went to Britain and Ireland. None of them were exported to the United States. So obviously they pick them green and send them along. It was super interesting to be down there. And so local people, I'm like, oh, you probably are sick of bananas. They're like, we rarely eat one because they're somebody else's property and we just work on the ranch. So it's, but they do eat more plantains, more of the ones for food. Okay, so where is the Soconusco here for these? It's again, just another formative village culture, all of the ones that we're looking at right now, very south in Mesoamerica. So it's this particular zone, shows some rivers and some other, and right here, this is where Mexico and Guatemala meet. So this river down here, lots of you already knew. This is the very, I know you knew it from your first map quiz. Right, so the reason this goes this way is the borderline here. This one is a geography borderline, and you get down here, and this is the Rio Suchiate. Tons of people cross this back and forth every day for a lot of reasons. It's very busy down there. Okay, so again, what does it look like when you actually get there? It's really pretty. It's flat, lots of grassy area here. The mosquitoes, unbelievable. That is one of the minuses for really wanting to be in this area, but because the soil is very good, there's lots of rain, and it's a flatter area. Remember, advantages versus disadvantages. The fact that this flooded, was super hot, had horrible insect infestation and insects that give people diseases like malaria and a number of others, dengue fever and things like that. Those minuses did not cancel out the fact that the main reason they were down there was to be farmers. So the farming went fine, the plants grew well. You had rivers, so you had some transportation, so you could move around a little bit, but boy, very physically uncomfortable kind of place to be. So where are we right here? We're right around in this zone. Looking at this area along the coast down here. The Olmec area that you're working on for your map is going to be right along in here, up here. And then West Mexico that we'll look at the end, really because it's so awesome, is over here on this area. So we're just looking at a couple of different spots. So we saw this already. I'm going to go past. We didn't quite finish everything I wanted to say about Tlatilco, so I just added a couple more things to finish that one up for you today. Tlatilco is very, so just skip a couple lines on your notes, and then this will be part of answering some questions on this. Tlatilco was very well excavated and was a big archaeological project carried on by INA, in National Institute for Archaeology and History in Mexico in the 1940s and the 1950s. It was discovered as the big city started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they were encountering the remains of lots of ancient things. Like, I'm sure, have you all seen the news that's been coming out for months that they've found the remains of, I think it is now hundreds of woolly mammoths real close to the airport zone in Mexico City today. And those mammoths, if they weren't killed by the local people, they were coming there and cutting them up and getting plants and food and things like that. I'm not sure why that's going on. Do I have to pay attention to it? Hold on a second. Oh, no, I don't have to. Real fast. I just need to turn around and look around real quickly. I know I've got workmen. Let's make sure somebody's not locked out. Yeah, jump down, you guys. All right, so all good. Still with electricity, it's all good. All right, so what they found was actually, and did mostly of their interest and reported mostly on, was their burials there. And we saw some images before we finished up last time, which was a week ago. Yeah, sorry about that. Lots of grave goods in there, and we were really just mainly looking at the figurines that were found with those. But they did find that people were buried with musical instruments, food containers, and that sort of thing. And that most all of the burials did have pretty much the same things in every burial. So we're seeing an egalitarian society, a society where most of the people rank the same as each other. They lived there for a long time, many centuries, which is why there's so many hundreds of examples of these figures and so forth. And we looked at a special importance, the female figurines, just a tremendous amount of those figures where we see they've got the really big hips, small waist, and very, very highly placed breasts, showing that they're really, really young. There are some that are pregnant there, and mainly the main energy that they spent on those was with the hair. More energy on the hairstyle than on clothing or necklaces or anything else that they might have been interested in using. And it has, and so there's always some different opinions when we find ancient things. And so I don't like to say that we actually know 100% what's going on for all these things, right? Because it's a really long time ago for that one. Oh, so cute. I know, your little kitty. Might as well. That's how kitties find homes. Speaking of, while you're doing this, one of my nephews, not on my husband's side, but on my side, is a really famous local musician, super famous. And so a little while back, his mom, who's actually, again, kind of famous to the band followers because she shows up in pictures with him all the time, found some orphan kitties in national cities. Somebody had moved away and left a whole litter of kittens behind. They were pretty small. So I think there are like 3 or 4 of them. And they were pretty little. And she's like, I don't know how to find homes to them. And I'm like, you should just get, your son to post them and give each kitten a name that has something to do with one of their songs. The kittens were all adopted in like an hour and a half. Highly motivated people. So luckily they went to all big fans of the band, but I know it's kind of hard to find homes for all the little guys all the time. For this one. So yeah, so some people say that perhaps these are supposed to be deities, and it's possible, but they really don't have the characteristics that we see later on that are used in this zone to indicate that a face, a figure, or an item is related to something supernatural. These do seem to be regular people. So what's the conclusion from Platilko? This will save you a little time going through the reading, is that when they analyzed the burials, they were getting kind of an idea about what their life was like. They had materials that were in the burials that didn't come from anywhere close to the community, like seashells, because this is way up near the center part of the nation at higher altitude. They had jade ornaments. There's no source for greenstone anywhere further close to Mexico City than all the way down in Guatemala. It's not a common stone in that particular area. They had little iron ore mirrors, turtle shells, but these would be sea turtles, not freshwater turtles, and even some little things that were made out of the type of oyster shells that make pearls. So not in everybody's burial, but they had some of that. So they had a lot of contact with people living further away already at 1000 BC. So already very sophisticated. And the only reason I'm lingering so much on this, just as we start the class, is that I noticed that so many people, when they think about the ancient world, and we're talking about smaller villages or people that are growing their own food, think of them as really kind of not sophisticated, not well-traveled, not aware of the rest of the world, not adventurous, not good at inventing things. And so forth. And that's certainly not what's going on for them. This is, their lives had a lot of contact outside of their own zones. So it does suggest, since not every single person who was buried had exactly the same stuff, that there were some individuals that had access to things that not everyone could have. Either they got them as gifts, or maybe they were the ones that received more in trade, where they were doing a little bit more outside trade or traveling a little bit more than the rest of the community. So already beginning to have leaders emerging in the community. People that everybody else celebrated a little bit more or looked to for ideas. And then also in a very small number of burials, there were some rare items that were found in burials with children. And that starts to tell us that rank or importance is inherited. Because, right, because a child wouldn't have traveled, wouldn't be good at solving problems, wouldn't be somebody that was a leader when conflict arose. So when children have things, it means that the family gave them those things, that not that they didn't earn it. So this is hereditary rank, the beginning of hereditary rank. Because what happens, if we just think of it just globally for all humans, if your family has something that's super valuable or valuable, let's just even say moderately valuable, and you decide that somebody's passed away and you're going to put it in the casket and put that casket in the burial or in one of the big wall type mortuary monuments, then essentially that really valuable item, you actually said, we can afford to throw it away. We don't have it anymore. We can't give it away to someone. We can't entice someone to marry into the family with this awesome item. We can't trade it away in a time of need. We are so wealthy, we are so prosperous that we can put something away forever, because we know we can get more of it. That's not my family. on either side of it ever. But I think I've already told you that on both sides of my family, I had grandparents on both sides that grew up in orphan situations. So in my side of the family, every piece of anything jewelry or watches, if they were kind of expensive in their own day, if it had a diamond in it, if it was gold, if it was had a pearl in it or something like that, when those people passed away, they were buried in very, very nice outfits, and they had basic things like the plain wedding band, but they did not get buried with valuable jewelry. The valuable jewelry was kept by the children, who then passed it down to the children, who passed it down to the children. Why? Because we know we're not going to, right, accumulate more of those things. And we want to remember those people, but memory is memory. We don't have to own their things in order to remember them generally. So in these, when we see these fancy things with infants, then it's an early example or an early bell that tells us we're looking at inherited social inequality. All right. Okay, so we looked at these, so I'm going to go past, but we didn't look at the picture of the type of figurines called from Chupiquito. And I just want you to see them because one, it's an example of how not every little area, they weren't copying each other, but they did have styles that would be recognizable from certain particular zones. So the site of Chupiquito is again in more of the Central Highlands in the state of Morelos. And if this is really something you're super interested in, this particular style I'm going to show you is called H4 type. Not too romantic there, but just in case you wanted to look them up. These are a little bit younger than the Tlatilco pretty lady style, but they have lots of things in common with function and the way they're made. The site of Chupiquito, not that many structures were found, and they were very, very basic wattle and daub houses. It doesn't look like a community where they had leaders that were particularly more wealthy or more powerful than everyone else. In other words, we don't only want to investigate the downtown area for the wealthiest, right? We don't find out about everyone in the United States by only studying Wall Street or only studying the most well financially situated neighborhood. We need to take a look at everyone. So here we go. I love Chupiquito as a style. Amazing. These are tiny. These are really, really small, just a few inches. Every one that I've ever seen, just a few inches. They're pretty flat on the back, so they're kind of like cookies. You turn them on the back and there's a little undulation, but they're not much going on back there. You don't get too much information. In these, we see pretty much the same basic idea as we saw last week with the others. So these are going to be a few centuries before the Common Era, before what you can consider 81 for this, that they're a little bit more interested in showing the earrings, a necklace, and how they combed their hair. Now, quite a few of them are showing that the hair is combed and parted or managed, and then they've got these little knots or balls that appear to be glued to the top. So many have this, that we know this must be some specific type of outfit. Whether these are just balls of bird feather or maybe some other kind of fiber or something like that, we're not exactly sure. In this case, you can see exactly parted in the middle and with the red paint. Red paint is one of the easiest colors of paint to make, and it lasts a long time. But with these, with pregnancy, you can really see it. See how this one is really obviously pregnant? Her stomach or lower abdomen is bulgy down here, and her breasts are full and round right up into her armpits here. So when they're pregnant, you can really tell they're pregnant, but still the same thing. They don't need feet. They don't need long arms. You know that they're human. They can't be anything else. In these three, they're clearly not female. They're really clearly showing you that these are males, but they do have fancy hairstyles for them for whatever the activity is. And they're showing these little necklaces here made out of maybe seed pods or something. Could be kind of simple. But the one thing, in case I give you some visual, which I will, some just, can you identify where this particular style comes from? These the eyes on these look like coffee beans. They always do. They're not using the fingernail to gouge in for the eye. They're just taking a little extra piece of clay and gluing it on the outside. So they have these little coffee bean eyes. To me, these look like little mice people. And so I always thought of these as little mice people. They're small, a little flattened on the back, and so forth. This one is holding something up to the mouth. It's probably something that you would blow on that's maybe making a whistle-like noise or something else. Could be that they're eating something, but it also could be something that the person is inhaling. So, but we see again, these large, noticeable ear ornaments here, big ones, and they want you to see them. And they're exactly the same on the males versus females. And in fact, the hairstyles are pretty much the same on the other ones too. So they do make other types and styles, but these are pretty noticeable. Okay. So for that one, I'm going to go out of this one and double check and see if there's anything else on that particular topic that I feel like we want to take a look at for that. Oh, there was one. I am going to do this just because. Let me go over to here. Because I mentioned the other day, yes, so let me pull this back up. Where's this one? Go back over to share screen. It's hard for me to get it to do this and share with you. I know last time you said you were having trouble seeing it, so, and get it to go to the exact right one. So go over here again. So now these are a set. Here we go. All right. Apparently it doesn't want me to do that. We saw all these. I'm going to try to make it go fast. Oh, it's actually doing what I want it to. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so this little set here. So these are two Piquito figures. And here you can see, they really need you to know, go back for this one. They really need you to know, even though this is just a couple inches, that this is a female. Can you see here just a little bit that she did have body paint originally? Probably really easy to see when it was brand new. They're showing some painting up and down and horizontals on her legs. In this case, bracelets on the little short arm. So they gave her a little bit of arm. You can see the stack of bracelets, some sort of collar here, fancy hair, these coffee bean eyes and a nose, kind of like a little mouse here on this one, looking down, but they've even moved, right, her vagina up closer to where her belly button should be so that you can clearly see that this is a female. In the opposite over here with this little diaper kind of garment on, this is a very typical Mesoamerican garment for males. And so we're seeing a male here. He's holding something here that has a little loop to it, not easy to see exactly what it is. So they're showing us, yes, you've got some jewelry on, necklace, exactly the same style in both of them. See the diagonal designs to the hair. And this, is the hair cut short? We really can't say that about it, but it's possible. Now they aren't always, beautifully done. That's because individual people or families made their own, and some people have a little bit more skill. But in this one, we see that they're showing us a couple, and with, again, the coffee bean eyes. This one, two Piquito, see, kind of more like a cookie. In this one, again, they're just pulling everything up onto the main focal point so that you know for sure if somebody's holding it, carrying it, or has it leaning on something or placed somewhere, that this is supposed to be female. Let's not bother with this one, but some of them very, very basic, not particularly, this is not strictly Chupiquito style, but here we've got a breastfeeding mom. And another one. This is more like the Tlatilco style that we saw before, and clearly somebody holding their puppy their little dog. We know that they had dogs. We know that this is female because this low slung skirt band that emphasizes the hips is very popular in the formative period. And the artist still wants you to know she's a woman, so you can still see her breast here underneath the dog. Here's a few more. Aren't they awesome? Yeah, they once you get comfortable with knowing the styles, it's not really hard to see which one is which, right? So these are two piquito again, a couple of sizes. This is the bigger of the three, but clearly these two are pregnant. This one has a little tummy bump, not too large. This one a little bit too, but they're really showing you that they are female. Once you can't see the crotch part to show you that they're female, then pretty much that's the suggestion that the pregnant belly is there. Body paint could be tattoo, maybe, maybe not, we don't know. This very similar hairstyle where the hair is piled up and then braided or twisted around. And yeah, I love these. Now, do they all show happy females? No, I don't know. I don't know what this is all about for this one, but I have seen it in a number of art books. And in this case, she's clearly not happy. And for whatever reason, the dog is pulling on her breast. Whether it's supposed to be feeding or not, we don't know. An unusual posture, the one to the left, is when
they... It's not changing. You're still seeing the 4 people.
For these, in the this kneeling posture is the birthing posture. So they did not lay on their back as far as we can reconstruct from the ancient period in this part of the world. The women were supported by helpers, sometimes kind of a rope softly tied around the ribs or armpits that would help you hold on. And then they kneeled to do this, and then gravity would make it a little bit easier to have the baby. So yeah, so that was the one. Motherdom, these little holding the figures, and these little cradle or board kind of things. These could be sick people as well, though. We can't really say that, but this is the area, the central area a little bit more. So, okay, so let's get out of these. For that one. All right, so just kind of. So let's use the last few minutes to set up for jumping into the culture known as Olmec. Olmec gets much more attention than the other, than the other formative cultures. Lots of times, okay, lots of times, well, I'll see if I can embed them in another way later on. So lots of times, it almost sounds like when you're learning about Mesoamerica, it almost sounds like that the Olmec were the only culture that was doing anything, innovating anything, or surviving during that early period. And you will also sometimes see, especially older discussions or presentations on the Olmec, that somehow they used to be called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Olmec culture is not a mother culture of the ones that we're looking at, but they are influential and large-scale neighbors. So they're right on the edge of the Maya zone. They were trading with the Mokaya down on the Pacific edge of Mesoamerica. Olmec, as you know from your map activity, are up there in the Gulf zone there. And they were well known, or at least their religion and their symbolic images were well known to other cultures speaking different languages all the way up around into the zone where we would think of central highland Mexico today. So very, very influential in some ways, but they were not taking control of the region, nor were they changing everything about their neighbors. So they are a well-documented early chiefdom there. And we have two bases of Olmec culture. I know the dates are not necessarily your favorite. So in the middle, so they're really more in regards to the middle formative period. And there are two really huge centers of activity. Sometimes they used to be called capitals, but again, we don't think this is an integrated, centrally managed urban state. So the early one of the very large Olmec communities, the oldest of the two that are huge and have been pretty well investigated, is San Lorenzo. So that's SL. San Lorenzo is active, huge, and just doing the most incredibly large-scale construction and other types of projects between 1200 BC and 900 BC. At about 900 BC, though, the focus of ritual and large-scale activity shifts. It shifts to a slightly different area. They don't go really far away, which is why you're doing the map activity, but shifts to a site that's even better understood than San Lorenzo, which is called La Venta. So, and then La Venta, for about 500 years, is one of the larger communities in all of Mesoamerica. So San Lorenzo and La Venta. And sometimes they just call it the San Lorenzo phase, and then the next one after that, the La Venta phase. There is a visitor park area along the Gulf Coast that is linked to, so we'll just give you some, in our last few minutes, just some key vocabulary to jot down, and then we'll call it a day, just so you know what you're looking for this one. That is Park La Venta, or Parque La Venta, and has some of the sculpture and other sorts of things to take a look at, because going to the site itself is more problematic for a variety of reasons. In Parque La Venta, only I think it was a year ago, but maybe it's getting close to 2 years ago, some foreign visitors from the Middle East actually went into the park and defaced and damaged some of the most important early stone sculptures ever collected from Mesoamerica. Their passports were taken and they were escorted out of the country, but the disrespect and nastiness of it was just, yeah, not real common. So who knows really what they were doing or why they were actually doing that. I was just happy that it wasn't someone from the United States and that it was another country to get pissed off. Okay, so as we're talking, we'll define, I'll go over this with you for Olman. We're going to learn some basic terms for types, the way that certain things are used. So that's what effigy is. One of the archaeological sites that you are looking for and you're going to put on the map is called El Manatí, and some of the most interesting things ever discovered in the zone. Really rare stuff. Things made out of wood, for instance, were found in this particular area, although it's not a gigantic urban center. San Lorenzo, we talked about La Venta. This is Bufo alveolus or Bufo marinus, is a living species of something. We'll come back to that one. At La Venta, and here in blue, the reason this is in blue is that this is a building that has a formal name. And so the Great Mound is from La Venta, and it is really famous all on its own. Cache is another activity-oriented word. And then as you're reading, they'll talk to you about mosaic pavements. Vocabulary word like effigy and cache, votive. We'll just do that in class next time. And on your map, you're looking for, again, real specifically though this time, where are the Tuxtlas Highlands? Where exactly is San Martin Bajapan in that? And what's the relationship between these two natural features on the landscape and the location of where people are actually living, like El Manatí, San Lorenzo, or La Venta? You have, yeah, I've been down there and it was really, really awesome. It's also, I was there a really long time ago when I was really young and did sometimes some really ill-advised activities. So with there, so they had at the time some jaguars in a cage, and probably had been in the cage since they were younger kittens. At any rate, they were rubbing their faces against the thing. And for whatever reason, because I was entranced by them, I actually stuck my hand through the cage. And one of the cats grabbed my hand with both paws. But because I'd been growing up with animals all the time, I did not try to pull my hand away or move. And so it didn't end up scratching me or biting me. But if I'd have done anything panicky or fun, I probably would have ended up at the hospital for that. Was my father was with me, was really pissed and said, why did you do that? Sometimes we just do dumb stuff and we do it because we're not thinking. So, but that was not good for that. So greenstone, jadeite, nephrite, and serpentine. These are 4 words for green colored stones. Usually in the literature for all everyday people and tourists, they tell us that everything is made out of jade, but actually it's not actually jade. And so we'll look at that. Okay, so that's a good spot for us to stop for today. And I'll find a way to